Hello guys, welcome to my channel. My name is Sol and you are watching top 5 pros and cons of being visually impaired. Before I begin, I just want to give a quick shout out to my new vlogging channel, Life of Sol. It's going to be a deep introspective look into my life, how I get on day to day being visually impaired, training for the Paralympics and a whole bunch of other stuff. If you're interested in watching people's lives or being inspired with how someone with a visual impairment just gets on with it, doesn't complain. I'm probably giving myself too many compliments, but you know what I mean. If you're interested in vlogging, go ahead to that channel and watch some of my day-to-day activities. Another quick shout out, I swear we will get onto this video. Instagram and Twitter @KingSolGB. Follow me over there for daily content. So the title of this video is top 5 pros and cons of being visually impaired. Obviously, I am visually impaired. What does this mean? A visual impairment, often mistaken with being blind, is somebody that suffers with an eye condition that limits their sight. So for most people, they have 20/20 vision, but for people that are visually impaired, they have less vision than the average individual. There are hundreds of visual impairments. There are people that only have tunnel vision. There are people that only have peripheral vision. There are people where their eyes shake to the point where they can't focus something. There are some people where everything's just blurry. And do you know what I mean? There's just hundreds of different types of visual impairments. And I personally suffer with something called RP, or retinitis pigmentosa. Now, this is commonly known as something called tunnel vision. So I only see through a tiny hole in the center of my left eye, and my right eye I don't even talk about because it's just so far gone. Now, the worst thing about RP is that it gets worse over time. So when I was younger, I probably had about 80% of my eyesight. And over time, it's gradually gotten worse to the point where at 20 years old right now, I probably have about 10%. And unfortunately, it's going to carry on getting worse to the point where I have 0. So I'm on this journey of constantly losing my sight every single day. So once again, this video is about the top 5 pros and cons of being visually impaired, how you benefit in society from being visually impaired, but then, the negative side of it, things that people might not really understand, that you struggle with on a day-to-day basis of being visually impaired. So, I've talked too much, let's get into the video. The first pro of being visually impaired, this might only apply to living in London, you get a freedom pass. Now, a freedom pass is essentially an Oyster card or a travel card that you tap around London on buses and trains and undergrounds to open a barrier so you can walk in and use that mode of transport. Now, for the majority of people, they have to pay for their Oyster cards in order to get around London. But if you have a disability or a visual impairment, that means you can't drive. Obviously, I'm visually impaired. I'm not allowed to be behind the steering wheel. So I'm automatically forced to use public transport, which is expensive. So therefore, London boroughs give me something called a freedom pass, which allows me to use buses and trains for free. All of my friends are jealous that I have a freedom pass because I can jump on a train or jump on a bus anytime I want and go places without having to pay. And this drastically reduces my monthly travel cost and my monthly expenses. That is a big pro. It's a huge money saver, and it just saves me a lot of money getting around traveling through London, which is expensive. The first con or negative point of being visually impaired is that it's an invisible disability. Now, if you don't know that I have RP, you won't know because there's nothing obvious. There are certain things, like when I use my white cane, which is obviously what blind people use to get around, you'll be like, oh yeah, obvious, he's blind. Or sometimes my eyes might drift to top right a little bit, you might see that on the camera, but unless I've told you or unless you've seen these things, you won't really ever know that I'm visually impaired. And so I put myself, or I get into situations sometimes where people just don't know, and basically I do something that looks so stupid and people start judging me, and it just, it just snowballs into something it shouldn't be. And I'll give you an example. I'm there with my freedom pass, going into the underground, yay, free travel in London, walking down the escalators. Because of the lack of peripheral vision, I knock somebody with my shoulder and they look at me thinking, what mate, do you want to go? Are you trying to fight? And I'm thinking, oh no, he doesn't know I'm visually impaired and they think I'm trying to start a fight. And now it becomes something because I'm not holding my white cane, so it's so obvious to them that I'm visually impaired. And if I stand there going, making eye contact, going, oh no, I'm blind, they're gonna think I'm taking the mick even more. And it just, you know what I mean? It's an invisible disability that doesn't explain itself. So you're constantly, knocking things over, walking into lampposts, pushing people, just things that if you weren't visually impaired, people think you're taking the piss or you're drunk or something, and you just have to explain it every time you do these things, and it's just a nightmare. So that's the con of being visually impaired. It's not obvious, it's invisible, and you're constantly having to explain yourself to people. So, a pro of being visually impaired, number 2, you're different. You're not like everybody else, you are unique, and you do stand out. Back in the day, everybody wanted to be the same. Everybody wanted to wear the same shoes, they wanted to fit in with the crowd, and if anybody stood out, it'd be a bit controversial, you're different. Now, the world has switched to something where everybody wants to be different. We've had the same old, we want to stand out. Why should I follow you on Instagram? Why should I follow your YouTube channel? Because I want you to be different than everybody else and I want you to have a story. People with visual impairments are different. They all have a story, they've all had a struggle, and they all have something to offer the world. And I think that's a pro. I think that's something to embrace. You're not like any other Tom, Dick and Harry. You are your own person, with your own stories, and you've come from a journey and, you've experienced things along the way and you have stories to tell. So I think that's a huge pro, to be different and stand out from the crowd because you have a visual impairment. Now, the second con to being visually impaired is that nothing is ready or accessible for you to just grab and go. Now, I'll give a couple of examples. Things like the newspaper, a library, a computer, a phone, posts, the next train that's arriving, when it's arriving on a train station, a map, a menu in a restaurant, ingredients on packaging. Just so many things in society people take for granted. We visually impaired people have an extra barrier to face. I can't just jump on a tube, pick up a Metro newspaper and read it. I can't just walk into Pret, pick up a sandwich and read the ingredients. I can't just walk into a library and pick up a book. There are so many things that I'm restricted from doing that everybody else can just do because that's the way the world has been set out, for ordinary people with ordinary eyesight to just go out and do. It's something that, you face day to day. I can't just pick up my phone and read a text message. I have to zoom into it and get an audio reader to read it back to me. There's just so many things, so many hurdles you have to go through before you access everything like everybody else. So that's a negative. The world doesn't come built for visually impaired people. We have to actively go out there and make it accessible for ourselves. The third pro of being visually impaired, now I'm gonna say exclusively in the West or in Great Britain, is the level of support that you receive. Now, I'm gonna tell a little story just to contrast what I'm trying to explain. I was born in Africa and my first schooling years were in Africa. I went into my classroom, I sat down, I looked at the board, I realized I couldn't see it, obviously because of my vision impairment. My teacher thought I was messing around. He told me to get out and go home. Now, that story is to basically say nobody understands about disabilities and how to deal with them in other countries. Whereas when my family moved to the UK, I was then able to be put into a classroom. I had books that were enlarged, to bigger, bolder font so I could see it. I had a teaching assistant sitting next to me. I had a laptop that I was typing away on Word with big giant writing so I could access it. All the way through my schooling, got my GCSEs, got into university, everything was great. There's a lot of access, there's a lot of support, and there's a lot of flexibility to allow you to do everything everybody else does. You're not discriminated from having an education. You're not discriminated from getting a good job. You're not discriminated for raising a family. You're able to do everything. Obviously, you have to do everything specialized so you can access it, but the support is there. People are there to help you. Infrastructure is there. Technology is there to allow you to do that. So I'm so grateful to be living in a country where, you know, that level of support and access is available. The third con of being visually impaired is that everything takes longer. I can't just walk out of my house and do what I want when I want. Everything has to have a process. If I want to read a newspaper, I have to get the iPad, I have to go into iBooks, I have to find today's edition, I have to turn on Siri voiceover, I have to put some earphones in, and I flick to page 1, and obviously it starts reading to me the newspaper. Same exact process with books. If I want to make scrambled eggs, I have to, you know, get my magnifying glass out, I have to look at the scales, I have to pour out the milk with a talking jug. There's so many things I have to do just to do a thing prior to doing the thing. So everything takes double the time, everything takes double the effort. And this isn't complaining, obviously, because I'm really fortunate to have those equipment to allow me to do that. But it's just a point, you know, you have to go that extra mile just to do everything everybody else gets. Yeah, that's it. Everything just takes longer to do because you have to do an extra step just to access the thing in the first place. It's such a roundabout way of doing things, but you get there in the end. Fourth pro of being visually impaired is that you have an excellent memory. Because you can't see the world, most of the world happens in your head. So you tend to have a better memory, especially with people. You remember people's voices a lot better because obviously you're not seeing their face as well. You remember directions a lot better. Placement of things, so I know where I left something and I know where to find it when I come back, because I think for most people that have full sight, you know, they'll look around the room, oh, it's there, pick it up, you know, on with the day. For me, I can't just look around, I have to remember where it is in my head. So for that reason, I think my memory is a lot better. Memory of people, memory of places I've been, memory of where I've left something, a list, you know, shopping list, usually have that in my head, good to go, so I know where to go in the shop. Just, yeah, general memory, absolutely excellent due to the fact that I have to adapt to not having the sight. The fourth con of being visually impaired, which I guess is also a pro because it makes you a better person, is that you always have to be organized. Like I said before, you can't just get up and do something. There has to be a plan and a system in place before you do that. So before I go to my training, I have to check that my public transport route is working. I know when to get off, when to get on. So that's all memorized, that's all in my head. I have to lay out my clothes for the next day so that I'm color coordinated and I'm not wearing random things because, you know, my color accuracy isn't that great. So everything has to be prepared the night before, whether it's food, equipment I'm going to use the next day, clothes, emails and communication. Just everything has to be organized, everything has to be systemized to ensure the smooth running of that day. And, you know, obviously a lot of people do this anyway. I think it's quite a general thing that people do, but I think if you're visually impaired, you have to do that a little bit extra just to make sure your life doesn't collapse. But also, you know, like I said, as much as it is a con, it's also a pro because it makes you more of an organized person in general. Number 5, I'm going to start off with a con actually because I'm going to finish it off with a positive pro. Everything's just difficult. It's just difficult to live a life with a visual impairment, you know. There's no other way of putting it. Like I said, everything takes longer. Everything is just a roundabout system. You have to deal with people. You have to explain yourself constantly. You have a lack of confidence when you go outside. You have to be so aware and conscious consistently and constantly throughout your day to make sure that you're not putting yourself or other people in danger. And if you have a deteriorative eye condition like myself, you're constantly on edge that you're not going to see as much tomorrow as you are seeing today. It's just consistent difficulty and consistent hurdles that you have to jump. And not to mention the prejudices of society. If you want to get a job and you walk into that interview and you tell them you're visually impaired, red flags. How are we going to deal with you? How are you going to do the work? You know, what's the point in employing you? Just, that's it. It's just difficult. Hurdles, battles. People not believing in you. People putting you in a box. People restricting what they think you can achieve. It's just difficult. So to end it off with a positive, the fifth pro of being visually impaired is that at the end of the day, after all the negatives that have happened, you grow into a better human being. You're more prepared, you're more aware, you're more conscious, you're in it for the long run.
You're creative.
You're creative when it comes to problem solving. How do I do this? How do I do that? I'm not just going to give up. You know, I'm going to have to find a way to do this. You have more endurance because obviously it takes you twice as long to do things. You're more persistent. You're more driven. You're more ambitious. You want to prove something to the world. You want to inspire other people. You have a lot more empathy. You have a lot more desire to succeed and achieve what you want to do. You have solid, concrete goals. And so, yeah, it's just a whole list of positive things it brings to your life. Yes, there are those extra barriers and hurdles you have to go through, but I can definitely say that if it wasn't for my visual impairment, I wouldn't be the person I am today. But yeah, I just wouldn't have the ambition that I do, I don't think. You know, that ambition comes from years of trial and error, facing those barriers and overcoming them and just pushing and pedaling towards what I want to achieve. And, you know, it just, people that are faced with barriers in their life and overcome them, you just see that they have something in them, that they're ambitious and they just want to go for it. You know, they're not worried about the difficulties that life might bring them. They just know that with time and effort, they're going to achieve it. So, you're a better person, you're a stronger person, and you just have more fulfillment in your life. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you did watch it all the way to the end, please comment down below what you found most interesting about those facts that I've just shared. If you have any questions about visual impairment or anything about myself or my sport, please put it in the comments and I will try my best to make a video about it or reply to your comment. If you liked the video, leave a thumbs up so I know that you like these kind of videos, and if you don't, leave a dislike so I can change the topic. Obviously the big one, don't forget to subscribe so I know that there's demand for these kind of videos and I'll make more going for the future. And have a fantastic day, week, month, year, lifetime. Bye.